A simple trip to the park, and my precious son, Nesson, was gone. Panic surged through me as I searched frantically, my heart pounding. Then my phone rang. It was him, Mike Spencer, my ex. "If you want to see Nesson, come find me." His voice was sharp, cutting through my desperation like a blade. Without hesitation, I rushed to the address he provided. The moment I stepped inside, the door locked behind me. My stomach dropped. Mike cornered me, his tall frame pressing in as he sneered, his voice rough. "You really thought you could run? Pregnant with my kid, taking him with you? Impressive." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Nesson. "Mommy, I'll let you and Daddy enjoy your honeymoon in peace." What did this supposed to mean? This was a setup. I never imagined that a simple idea, taking Nesson to the park after dinner, would turn into my worst nightmare. One moment, he was beside me. The next, he was gone. Desperation clawed at my chest as I ran through the park, grabbing random strangers, shoving his picture from my phone in their faces. "Have you seen this boy?" One after another, the answers were the same. No. I was unraveling. 30 minutes passed. I had scoured every corner of the park, my energy drained, my hope slipping. As the sky darkened and the crowd thinned, I collapsed onto a bench, staring at the picture on my screen, his chubby cheeks, his bright, trusting eyes. Tears burned behind my lids. What if someone took him? What if he was scared? No. I couldn't afford to think like that. I had to call the police. I was about to head to the station when my phone rang again. The moment I saw the number, my entire body froze. There was no name attached, but I didn't need one. I knew it by heart. I sucked in a deep breath and answered. Before I could even say a word, a sharp, impatient voice cut through the line. "If you want to see your son, come find me." I stood frozen, my grip on the phone tightening. Silence stretched between us before he snapped, "Rebecca, are you listening?" The sharpness in his tone jolted me. I found my voice, anger and panic mixing in my words. "Mike, are you out of your damn mind? I'm losing it over here, and you. 58th Street, apartment 1909. Now. Don't waste time." The line went dead. I blinked, my mind struggling to process. So, he kidnapped his own son? For a moment, I wished it was just a case of a lost child. Anything would have been better than this. I didn't have time to dwell on the insanity of it all. I knew Mike, he was unpredictable, reckless. If I hesitated, I might never see Nesson again. I flagged down a cab and gave the driver the address. Only after the car pulled into traffic did I register what he had said. 58th Street, apartment 1909. A cold realization settled in my gut. That was our place. The apartment Mike and I used to live in together. The place where I found out I was pregnant with Nesson. So, he still lived there? As the cab sped through the city, I let out a humorless laugh. Unbelievable. I paid the fare and stepped out of the cab, my legs moving on autopilot as I headed toward apartment 1909. Familiarity settled over me like a second skin. I knew this place too well. I knocked lightly. The door swung open almost instantly. And there he was. The face that had haunted my dreams more times than I cared to admit. "Rebecca," Mike drawled, a smirk curling on his lips. That was fast. His mocking tone shattered any lingering nostalgia. Right. How could I forget? His unpredictable, insufferable personality was exactly why I ran all those years ago. Where is Nesson? I wasn't here for small talk. I didn't have time for his games. My eyes flicked over the apartment. The layout was the same, almost eerily so. The only difference was the furniture, now sleeker, more expensive. He's somewhere safe. Mike spoke so casually, like he hadn't just admitted to kidnapping our son. My stomach clenched. Wait. Had that little rascal actually slipped away? So, Mike had snatched him, but Nessun had managed to escape. And like an idiot, I had walked straight into the trap? Shit. I spun on my heel, ready to bolt. But before I could take a step, my wrist was yanked back. I barely had time to react before I was pulled inside, the door slamming shut behind me. The next second, my back was against the door, and Mike was right there, so close I could see the specks of gold in his dark eyes. My breath hitched. My damn traitorous heart stuttered. Yeah. Fine. I admit it. I was, and always had been, weak for a good-looking face. Back in college, I chased after Mike purely because he was hot. Never in a million years did I think he'd actually say he liked me. At the time, I had laughed, nodding along. Sure, buddy. I liked his face, that much was undeniable. But him liking me? That had always felt like a joke. The most sought-after guy on campus, chased by practically every girl, and yet, somehow, I was the one who ended up with him? I never let myself believe it. A warm breath ghosted against my neck, yanking me back to the present. I flinched, snapping out of my thoughts. Mike, this is illegal. Let me go. He tilted his head, utterly unfazed. I'm a lawyer. You really think I don't know what's legal and what's not? I let out a dry laugh. Oh, so you knowingly broke the law? That's even worse. Mike shrugged, completely unaffected. I just wanted to invite you to reminisce about our old place. Why are you so jumpy? I nearly choked. Oh, I don't know, maybe because you just abducted our son and locked me in? I inhaled sharply. Move. I need to find my kid. Nessun was only 4. If he was really lost out there. No. I couldn't think about that. Mike didn't budge. Instead, he reached into my bag with infuriating ease, pulled out my phone, and used my own damn fingerprint to unlock it. I watched, stunned, as he scrolled through my screen like he owned it. A slow smile tugged at my lips, but it wasn't a friendly one. Guess being a lawyer wasn't enough for you. Had to pick up some petty theft skills along the way, huh? He glanced at me lazily. And I see you've been developing a lovely fishwife personality. There it was. Mike never pulled punches when it came to sarcasm. I snorted, lunging for my phone. He simply raised his arm, using his ridiculous height advantage to keep it out of my reach. Go ahead, he taunted, smirking. If you can grab it, you can have it. Oh, you smug bastard. Frustrated, I jumped, reaching for it. We struggled, our movements chaotic, until my hand accidentally collided with the most unfortunate spot on his body. Mike's smirk vanished. His entire face twisted in pain. I snatched my phone back, grinning victoriously as he doubled over slightly. Mike, I said sweetly, stepping back toward the door. Bye. Just as I was about to walk out, my phone screen lit up with a new message from Nessun. Mommy, I won't disturb you and Daddy on your honeymoon. Daddy? My fingers trembled. I nearly dropped my phone. I had never told Nessun that Mike was his father. So how the hell did he know? You always this slow, or is it getting worse? Mike's voice, laced with mockery, snapped me back. He had always been sharp-tongued, but damn, had he gotten even worse over the years? It was like he'd die if he didn't take a jab at me every few seconds. But I wasn't the same woman I used to be either. Flashing him a perfectly polite smile, I shot back, I know an excellent dentist. Should I book an appointment for you, Mr. Spencer? Someone should knock his teeth out so he can finally shut up. To my surprise, he actually nodded, like he was pleased. You've improved. The way he said it, like some sort of twisted compliment, made my stomach twist. I refused to let him derail me, so I lifted my phone and shoved the message in his face. Care to explain this? Rebecca, you really should try being the bad guy for once. There he goes again. I exhaled sharply, forcing a smile. Mike, does speaking like a normal person interfere with your ability to be a jerk? His eyes darkened as he shot me a glare, and I immediately knew I had poked the bear. I shrank back a little. Fine. Point taken. Back then, I had been too distracted by his gorgeous face to do a proper background check on his personality. By the time I realized his sharp tongue could cause actual cardiac arrest, it was already too late. I wasn't good at arguing back then. But now? Let him try me. Idiot. We glared at each other for a few seconds before he finally let out that single word. I smiled and nodded. Yep, I'm an idiot. How else would you explain me falling for you? And I caught myself before finishing that sentence. Instead, I crossed my arms and pressed on. So? Are you going to tell me why you took my son? His expression remained unreadable. Then, suddenly, he grabbed my chin, tilting my face up to meet his gaze. You've got some nerve, Rebecca, he said, voice dangerously low. You went behind my back and had my child. Do you have any idea how illegal that is? I could sue you for stealing my genetic material. I blinked. Did this man just? Oh, of course. Only a lawyer would phrase it like that. I laughed, slow and sweet. That's cute. But remind me, Mike, I leaned in just a fraction, lips curving into a smirk. Wasn't it something you willingly gave me? His eyes darkened further, but I wasn't fazed. I didn't know if Mike had ever truly loved me, but his obsession with my body had never been in question. No matter how careful you are, sometimes life still manages to screw you over. I found out I was pregnant after we broke up. And honestly? A part of me knew I'd probably never find someone as ridiculously handsome and talented as Mike again. So, I bit the bullet and had the baby. But now? Now my too smart for his own good son had dug a hole and thrown me straight into it. Unbelievable. Can't argue with that, Mike said, nodding in agreement like we were having a casual business discussion. His sharp eyes swept over me, unreadable. A bad feeling crept up my spine. I pushed against him, trying to create some distance, but he leaned in before I could escape, and kissed me. What the hell? I shoved him back. Don't try to distract me. How did Nesson even find you? Mike's expression remained calm. Saw me on TV during an interview. Thought we looked alike. Found me. I blinked. That little. So that's why, for a while, Nesson had been glued to the TV, obsessively watching news reports. I had been so damn proud, thinking I was raising the next generation star lawyer, only to realize he was just scoping out his dad. Smart little punk. Mike smirked. He's brilliant. Takes after me. I rolled my eyes. Oh, please. At least Nesson didn't inherit his father's inflated ego. Mike kissed me again, just as fiercely as he used to, hot, urgent, like he needed to consume me whole. Heat spread down my spine. My body still remembered him. Damn it. I pushed against his chest, desperate for air. He finally let up, but his voice dropped into something darker. Rebecca, why didn't you tell me you were pregnant? His gaze was intense, like he wanted to tear me apart and put me back together just to get inside my head. I forced a smile. I didn't think I was good enough for you. Would you believe that? His jaw clenched. What kind of bullshit excuse is that? Oh wow. The golden boy lawyer actually cursed. I swallowed a laugh but kept my expression neutral, ignoring the weight of his stare. I just want to see my son, Mike. Where is he? Trying to change the subject? He caught my chin, forcing me to look him in the eye. Rebecca, I'm a lawyer. Do you really think I can't tell when someone's lying? I flashed him my best innocent smile. You really want the truth? His grip didn't loosen. I sighed dramatically. Fine. I went after you because you were hot and smart, the perfect combination for a little dating fun. His expression didn't change, so I kept going. And when we broke up, I figured borrowing a little of your genetic material was a fair trade. I grinned, feeling way too pleased with myself. I mean, look at him. I passed your jeans down perfectly. You should be thanking me. Before I could finish, Mike's expression darkened. Okay. Maybe I pushed my luck. Time to play dead. Rebecca, you're unbelievable. Mike's voice was rough, laced with frustration. The next thing I knew, his lips crashed against mine, the kiss punishing. I sucked in a sharp breath. That bastard bit me. I shoved at him, but he didn't budge. His eyes were dark, almost wild. Why are you so heartless? His voice had turned hoarse, laced with something that almost sounded like hurt. I froze for a second, caught off guard. Me? Heartless? Funny. I could have sworn that title belonged to him. When I first pursued Mike, I had been fully prepared for war, to fight off every single woman who wanted him. But the butterflies never stopped swarming. Every day was a battle, warding off one love letter after another, making sure none of those girls got their claws into him. And what did I get in return? Every time I confronted him, asking about those notes I found in his pockets, he would only give me that same indifferent response, I don't like them. Did he ever like me? I never really knew. All I knew was that I was drowning in jealousy. It got so bad that I started dreaming about it. Night after night, I'd see him being sweet to some other girl, whispering words he never said to me. And he never made it easier. He always had to have the last word, always made me feel like I was the crazy one for being upset. Fights piled up. Until one day, I just gave up. I convinced myself to let it go. To move on. To stop fighting. To leave. I never expected to walk away with a child as a parting gift. Maybe, in some twisted way, that was my way of holding on to something from us. Something real. I followed Mike to his house. And there, sitting smugly in the living room, was none other than my traitorous little son. That little gremlin never left. Mike's house was a standalone villa in the heart of the city, where real estate prices were downright criminal. I couldn't help myself. I let out a dry chuckle. Looks like being a hotshot lawyer pays well. Mike didn't even blink. Not bad. Lots of criminals to keep me busy. Then he smirked, like he couldn't resist pushing my buttons. Need a lawyer? I'll even give you a 10% discount. I rolled my eyes so hard I almost saw my past life. Before I could shut him down, he slipped a business card into my hand. The gold embossing was sleek and expensive, just like him. I glanced at the name. Mike Spencer, managing partner and lead attorney, Wish Law Firm. Huh. Big title. But what really caught me was the name, Wish. For some reason, something in my chest tightened. What exactly was his wish? I quickly shook off the thought, scoffing at myself for even wondering. Please. A guy like Mike? With his looks, his career, his money? The moment I walked away, I bet those eager little butterflies lined up, waiting to devour him whole. Now wasn't the time for my mind to wander. The moment the door swung open, a small figure launched at me. Mommy. I caught Nesson just in time as he buried himself in my arms. I was ready to swat his little behind, but the sneaky brat jumped back first, grinning. A gentleman uses words, not fists. I crossed my arms. Good thing I'm not a gentleman, then. Before I could grab him, he wriggled back into my embrace, his tiny face beaming. But you're the best mommy in the world. Damn it. I sighed. Completely defeated. My raised hand dropped, and instead of scolding him, I just hugged him tighter, the sheer relief washing over me. You scared me half to death, do you know that? Nesson nuzzled against my shoulder, his small body warm and reassuring. I'm sorry, Mommy. Hearing his soft little voice, all the fear, the frustration, the anger, I let it go. He was safe. That was all that mattered. Next time, don't ever pull something like this again. Understand? Never again. His promise was earnest, but then he added, even if Daddy tells me more cool stories, I won't fall for his bad ideas anymore. Wait. What? I snapped my head toward Mike, glaring daggers at him. This bastard actually roped my kid into lying to me? Mike didn't even blink. It was the most effective strategy. No shame. No remorse. Not even a hint of guilt. Before I could argue, he scooped Nessun out of my arms with practiced ease. Did you finish all the problems I gave you? Mike asked. Yep. Super easy. Just like that, my traitorous son melted into his arms, calling him daddy like it was the most natural thing in the world. I stood there, watching them chat as they headed toward the main living area, and felt like my brain had short-circuited. What the hell? Was Mike trying to steal my son? No way. Lawyer or not, he wasn't taking my kid. Mommy, come in. Nessun waved at me, his voice full of enthusiasm. I shook my head. Sweetheart, it's time to go home. This was supposed to be a quick evening stroll, not an overnight trip. But this is our home. My heart skipped. Daddy and Mommy should live together, he declared, turning to Mike. Right, Daddy? Mike didn't hesitate. That's right. Then he turned to me, eyes dark and unreadable. Come inside. I forced a smile. I can't. I left something cooking on the stove. A weak excuse, sure. But also one he couldn't argue with. And since Nessun never went near the kitchen, he wouldn't rat me out either. Mike narrowed his eyes but didn't push. Instead, he grabbed his keys. I'll drive you both home. I wanted to refuse, but the way his gaze pinned me in place, I knew it wasn't up for debate. Fine. For tonight, I'd let him play chauffeur. The entire drive, Nessun bombarded Mike with questions about legal cases, showing an intense interest in the subject. I tried several times to tell him not to get too close to Mike, but the father and son were in such deep conversation that I couldn't find an opening to intervene. All I could do was sit there, feeling frustrated, watching the city pass by in the soft glow of the streetlights. Back when Mike and I had just started dating, I loved taking evening walks with him, hugging under the warm streetlights. The way our shadows intertwined in the dim light made me feel incredibly happy, as though we were meant to be together forever, growing old side by side. But alas, that was just a fleeting thought. If I hadn't pulled away when I did, I'd probably have been consumed by jealousy and lost my sanity, turning into the hysterical mess that I am now. Rather than tearing everything apart and breaking up, it seemed better to just walk away gracefully. Mom? Nessun's voice broke my reverie. Can I sleep with Dad tonight? No, I answered instinctively, shaking my head. But seeing the disappointment on his face, I quickly came up with a reason. Your bed's too small. You'd both be cramped. Nessun, ever so innocent, quickly countered, then I'll sleep in your big bed with Dad. We won't be cramped then. My face flushed, and I couldn't help but think, Nessun, you really are looking out for your dad. You're sending your mom into the lion's den, do you know that? I think that's a great idea. Before I could figure out how to reject him, Mike, who had been driving, suddenly chimed in. He even praised Nessun. Nessun is really smart, he knows how to think on his feet. Nessun, clearly pleased with the compliment, was no longer the same boy. I tried to argue, using every excuse to stop his innocent suggestion, but with Mike's help, Nessun cornered me, leaving me speechless. I begrudgingly dropped the topic, planning to discuss it with Mike later in private. But as I glanced over at Nessun's car seat, I couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Mr. Spencer, you're driving us home, aren't you worried Mrs. Spencer will have a problem with this? I couldn't resist poking fun at him. Why would a single man need a child's car seat in his car? Mike chuckled lightly. You're not going to cause me any trouble. You're all talk. You should introduce a good dentist to yourself. He retorted my exact words right back at me. I shot him a glare, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized what he was implying. I huffed in response, don't go around claiming a wife when we're not even on those terms. Rebecca, stop fooling yourself about your feelings for me. Mike sighed, as though helpless. I didn't answer, turning my face away to look out at the passing streets. That was the end of the conversation. When we got home, Nesson ran straight to his little room, probably up to some mischief. Mike, however, made a beeline for the kitchen. I was puzzled but followed him in, only to have him block me by the fridge. "Rebecca, are you lying to me again?" It took me a moment to realize he was referring to the soup. Sure enough, one lie leads to another. I chuckled nervously and tried to push him away, but he only drew closer. "I forgot to tell you, I already served the soup before we left," I explained, trying to sound casual. With one swift motion, he pulled me into his arms and opened the fridge. It was empty, no soup, not even eggs. The pantry was running low on supplies. "Go on, keep making up more lies," he said, his voice icy. His large hand gripped my waist while his other hand lifted my chin, forcing me to look him in the eyes. "Rebecca, let me hear how many more lies you can come up with." I wasn't even lying that much. I tried to push him away, but he remained unmoved. In my panic, I noticed Nesson walking out of his room. I quickly gave him a look, silently pleading for his help, but to my surprise, Nesson simply stared at us for a few seconds before acting like he didn't know what was going on. "Where did Dad and Mom go?" "Never mind, I'll just go back to my room and sleep," he muttered to himself, ignoring my desperate look and actually locking his door behind him. Nesson is such a clever and likable kid. Mike pressed against me, his gaze now smoldering and bold. "Rebecca, I hear your bed's pretty big. How about we test it out?" "Stop," I interrupted, my face burning from his shameless words. He was still the same as before. Once he got a taste of my body, he started getting hot-headed, saying things that made me think it was love. But I wasn't that naive Rebecca anymore. Why live like that, constantly worrying and questioning everything, when I could be living for myself and Nesson, earning money and building a life? After I rejected him, Mike didn't linger. I didn't bother asking about his life either. I didn't want to add fuel to the fire. A few times, he came to pick Nesson up for dinner or to play, and I just acted like I didn't know. After all, a child needs a father. Mike was his biological dad, so it was better for Nesson to be with him than anyone else. I had been grinding away, working hard to build a better future for me and Nesson. But I never expected my manager to suddenly demand that I entertain clients with drinks, and worse, that the client in question was old, ugly, and disgustingly handsy. I slapped him across the face. The next day, I was fired. "Rebecca, don't think you're more important than you are," my manager sneered when I went to confront him. His gaze was cold, condescending. "If you don't learn to use what you've got, you'll be a broke nobody for the rest of your life." I let out a laugh. Was this idiot serious? "I came here to work, not to sell myself. If you want to leave, fine. But you're not getting a dime from the company." I folded my arms. "I'm entitled to 3 months severance pay. By law. Unless you'd like me to take this further." The manager scoffed, looking at me like I was an absolute fool. "Rebecca, do you really think you have the power to fight me?" I glared at him, silently cursing his bald head into oblivion. Fine. This wasn't over. When I got home, I noticed something strange. The kitchen lights were on, soup was simmering on the stove, and fresh vegetables were neatly chopped on the counter. I blinked. Since when did we start getting house husbands? "Mommy, Daddy said we were out of pepper. He went to buy some and will be back soon." I turned to see Nesson poking his head out of his room. I raised an eyebrow. "Wait. When did you even get home?" "It's Friday, Mommy," he sighed, sounding far too mature for a 4-year-old. "Oh. Right." On Fridays, his kindergarten only had an afternoon enrichment class before early dismissal. But with everything going on at work, I had completely forgotten. "Go play," I said, trying not to let my frustration show. But my son was too sharp for his own good. "Mommy, are you upset about something?" He tilted his head, genuinely concerned. I hesitated, then sighed. He'd find out sooner or later. So I told him what happened. And instead of being shocked, he nodded seriously, like he was formulating a strategy. "Want me to talk to your manager?" he offered. I burst out laughing and kissed his chubby little cheek. "Thanks, sweetheart, but that won't help." Undeterred, he placed his hands on his hips. "Then I'll get Daddy to help you." "No need," I said quickly, shaking my head. But before I could stop it, a very familiar, very infuriating voice sounded from the doorway. "Rebecca, there are people begging for my legal services every day, and you're actually turning me down?" I turned, and there stood Mike, a bottle of pepper in one hand, his sleeves rolled up, looking every bit like some tall, handsome, doting househusband. I heard myself gulp and quickly looked away. Damn him for still hitting every one of my aesthetic weaknesses. "Even with a discount, I can't afford your ridiculous legal fees," I muttered. His footsteps grew closer. "I'll give you 50% off." Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he cleared his throat and winked at me. "Or," he added smoothly, "we can arrange alternative payment methods." This bastard. Before I could slam the door in his face, he strolled past me and into the kitchen. "Send me the details. I'll make sure you get 3 years' worth of severance instead of 3 months. Whoa. I stared at him. That's a little extreme, don't you think? Lucky for me, he was still a student back when we broke up. If he'd had this kind of ruthless legal prowess back then, I'd probably still be paying off damages. But since he was already dead set on helping, I explained the situation to him over dinner. The moment I mentioned the sleazy old man trying to harass me, I saw something cold and dangerous flicker in Mike's eyes. A second later, he put down his fork. "You're about to find out what it's like to have a lawyer for a husband," he said flatly. I choked. "Excuse me, what?" Mike didn't even blink. "You'll acknowledge me as your husband eventually." Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. I rolled my eyes and refused to engage with whatever hot-blooded nonsense he was spouting. Once he was off the phone, he said, "Your manager is slippery. If you go head-to-head with him, he'll make sure you lose." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you worried about me?" He looked over, his dark eyes glinting with amusement. "Rebecca, do I look like someone who loses?" I scowled. "At most, I'm getting my 3-month severance pay. You're not going to turn the world upside down over this." Mike leaned back, smirking. "I don't know about that. But I do know I can make sure they'll be lining up to hand you money." I blinked. Wait. Was he really that powerful? In just one weekend, my bank account balance had increased by 10 years' worth of salary. I stared at the amount, completely stunned. When Mike came to pick up Nesson for school, I immediately blocked his path. "Mike, isn't this too much compensation?" "Too much?" He scoffed, looking at me like I had never seen money before. "That old bastard is already in custody." He let out a disdainful snort. If they hadn't shown such impeccable remorse, I would have made sure they spent the rest of their lives behind bars. I looked at his sharp, confident face and suddenly felt a chill run down my spine. Mike was terrifyingly good at his job. I could picture him in court, utterly ruthless, leaving no room for mercy. While I was still lost in thought, he suddenly turned to me with a grin. "Come drop Nesson off at school with me." I snapped back to reality. By now, Nesson had already slung his backpack over his shoulder, ready to go. I, on the other hand, glanced at the fat stack of money in my bank account and felt an overwhelming wave of joy surge through me. "You go ahead," I announced proudly. "Starting today, I am officially sleeping in every morning. Thanks to my personal money fairy, Mike, I was retiring early." "What?" Mike's eyes narrowed dangerously, his gaze filled with warning. "If you don't get in this car right now," he said slowly, "I'll make you a broke woman overnight." I immediately took back every positive thing I had just thought about him. He was a menace. A tyrant. A straight-up villain. On the way to school, Nessun solemnly reminded me, "Mommy, you have to listen to Daddy, okay? I'll give you candy when I get home." I nearly choked. Who was the actual child here? You see how much trouble you cause? As soon as we dropped Nessun off, Mike turned to me, his tone icy. "If you don't start behaving," he mused, "I might have to put you over my knee as punishment." My jaw dropped. "Mr. Spencer, are you aware that domestic violence is a prosecutable offense?" His eyes lit up, like I had walked right into a trap. "So," he smirked, "you're admitting that I'm your husband?" I clenched my fists. Damn it. I had been too quick to snap back, and now he was twisting my words against me. "In your dreams," I spat. He raised a brow, looking all too amused. "Let's see how long you can hold out." "I'll hold out until you give up." By now, my verbal sparring skills had reached peak performance. It barely took me any effort to clap back at him. But just as I finished, Mike suddenly slammed on the brakes. The car came to an abrupt halt, and if not for my seatbelt, I would have gone flying. "Rebecca," he said, his tone low and intense, "do you know what your smart mouth is missing?" I huffed. "What?" "A kiss." Before I could process what he meant, he leaned in and crushed his lips against mine. I gasped. It wasn't a soft, teasing kiss. It was punishing, relentless, overwhelming. I shoved at his chest, fists pounding against him, but he wouldn't budge. This man was a wolf in disguise, always ruthless, always overpowering me. "Can't you just behave?" His tone softened, the intensity easing slightly. But I could still feel the frustration simmering beneath the surface. And suddenly, I broke down. Tears spilled down my cheeks before I could stop them. What did he want from me? I had left quietly, keeping my dignity intact. I had carried our child alone, never bothering him. I had never interfered when women threw themselves at him, had never clung to him, had never begged for anything. And yet, he still wouldn't leave me be. "Don't cry." His voice dropped lower, husky with frustration and helplessness. But his concern only made the tears fall harder. He had been the one to set my heart on fire, the one to cut me down with his sharp words, the one who never cared when other women clung to him. Mike Spencer was a walking toxin. And I had no antidote. I couldn't afford to want him. And I sure as hell couldn't survive loving him again. I wanted to go home. Instead, I was forcibly dragged to Mike's law firm. The name Wish was proudly displayed above the entrance, written in what looked like handwritten script. I stared at it, momentarily dazed. "I wrote it myself," Mike said beside me. "Then had it carved in." That explained it. Back then, he used to write me so many letters, filling them with all his dreams and promises. He once told me that I was the wish he had been waiting for. Sweet words. I had been so intoxicated by them that I would have given him everything. If it hadn't been for the endless swarm of women around him, I might have completely lost myself in him. "Go inside," he said, reaching for my hand. I dodged. He sighed, clearly exasperated. "Rebecca, when will you stop fighting me on everything?" I took a step back, flashing him a polite but insincere smile. "Mr. Spencer and I are neither relatives nor lovers. Keeping our distance is best." Then, with a deliberately slow blink, I added, "Also, I have zero interest in working here as a secretary. Forcing me into this is highly inappropriate." "If that's how you want to see it," he said coolly, eyes narrowing, "then yes, I'm forcing you." Then his voice dropped into something cold and sharp. "Remember, Rebecca, if you run, I'll take full custody of Nessun." This bastard. I nearly lost my fake smile. But for my son, I gritted my teeth and stepped inside. On the drive over, I had already done my research. Wish Law Firm wasn't just a big name in this city, it was renowned nationwide. And as its lead attorney, Mike was a golden ticket. Not a single case of his had ever been lost. Me bringing my small workplace dispute to him was like using a grenade launcher on a mosquito, completely overkill. "Mr. Spencer, your clients are already waiting for you," the receptionist informed him the moment we walked into the lobby. Mike gave a brief nod, then turned to me. "From now on, transfer all my schedules and meetings to her," he said. "Also, have HR process her paperwork immediately." The receptionist blinked. "Understood. And what position will she be holding?" "Personal secretary." Mike said it so matter-of-factly, as if this insanity was a completely reasonable decision. I barely had time to react before I caught the way the receptionists exchanged knowing glances, their gazes full of meaning as they glanced at me. "Oh, for God's sake." I could practically hear their thoughts. "Personal secretary? Oh, so it's like that, huh?" My face burned, but I forced myself to remain calm, stoic. After all, the only reason I was standing here was because Mike had blackmailed me with my own son. Otherwise? Hell would freeze over before I played secretary for him. The onboarding process was surprisingly fast. After I completed the paperwork, I was immediately bombarded with a stack of files to sort through. I had no idea where to begin, so I decided to go find Mike. He was in the meeting room, surrounded by a few male assistants, all sitting with serious expressions as they questioned a client. Gone was the playful rogue side of him I knew. In his sharp suit, under the bright lights, he looked handsome and authoritative. He occasionally scribbled down a few quick notes, exuding an air of decisiveness and efficiency. He must have sensed my gaze, because suddenly, he looked up and caught my eye. Our eyes met. For a moment, his usual stern expression softened, and he stood up, walking toward me. "What's wrong? Need something?" "Yes," I replied. "I have no idea where to start with this job. Could you have someone give me a brief orientation?" Since I was already here, I figured I had to play along and make the best of it. But he shook his head. "I'll introduce you to everything, but it'll have to wait until I'm free to teach you personally." I was about to decline, but before I could say anything, he had already turned back into the meeting room. As soon as he walked in, the client began tearfully pouring out their grievances, leaving me with no chance to speak. The entire conversation was one-sided, with me handing tissues and offering comfort, barely doing anything more than being a background figure. Mike, on the other hand, was impressive. Through his careful questioning, he quickly pieced together the case details. He needed the legal department to come in and handle the next steps, so one of the assistants immediately got up to notify them. I quickly followed suit. "I'm just stepping out for some fresh air," I said, as an excuse to leave the room. Mike glanced at me but said nothing. As I walked with the assistant, we made small talk. He teased, "It's the first time boss hired a female secretary, especially a personal one. Quite a rarity." I was caught off guard. "Wait, the entire secretary department is male?" "Yeah, you're the only exception," he nodded. I was momentarily stunned, not sure how I felt about it. Mike was so outstanding. When his previous suitors learned he was single again, why didn't they pursue him? Or was it that they had the same reservations as I did back then? Within a few days, I had gotten familiar with everyone at the law firm. Being the only female personal secretary in the entire office made me an instant celebrity. I didn't even need to introduce myself. News traveled fast, and people got to know me through all kinds of small office gossip. At first, it was awkward. But once I settled in, I grew a thicker skin. They could joke all they wanted, I simply played dumb. No one was getting any information about my relationship with Mike from me. At the same time, though, I finally understood why there weren't any other women in Mike's orbit. The answer? The legal department. More specifically, Linda, the department head. She was stunning, sharp, and intimidating as hell. The first time she locked eyes with me, I felt a strange guilt, like I needed to sit down and reevaluate my entire life. With a woman like her around, who would dare approach Mike? So it wasn't a shock when she came looking for me the moment Mike stepped into a meeting. I had been through this before, 5 years ago. "Rebecca," she said, cutting straight to the point. "I know you're Mike's first love, but you broke up 5 years ago. You need to stop clinging to him." Her voice was just as sharp as her stare. Don't covet what doesn't belong to you. I nodded. You're absolutely right. She blinked, surprised. So, I continued, smiling pleasantly, do you have a way for me to leave this firm without Mike making my life hell? If it weren't for his underhanded tricks, I wouldn't even be here. But Linda only grew more suspicious. She didn't believe me. Instead, she started spinning 1,000 conspiracy theories, trying to decide whether I was baiting her into a trap. I got tired of listening halfway through. Sighing, I met her gaze with genuine sympathy. Do you know why, after 5 years, Mike still hasn't fallen at your feet? Her expression stiffened. Why? Because you're paranoid and talk too much. I waved her off, completely done with her wild imagination. You're officially out of the running. Now leave. No matter how capable she was, she would never be a match for Mike. A sudden chuckle sounded from the doorway. Both Linda and I turned at the same time. Mike was leaning against the doorframe, looking relaxed and entertained. Judging by his smug expression, he must have arrived right after Linda did, meaning he had heard everything. His next words were calm but ruthless. If this happens again, he said coolly, you're fired. Just like that. Linda's eyes went red, her lips trembling. A second later, she turned and ran out. I shook my head, sighing. Mr. Spencer, your method of rejecting admirers is a lot more efficient now than it was back in the day. If he had been this decisive when those girls had been handing him love letters years ago, would I have fallen apart so badly that I had to leave him? Mike stepped in, casually shutting the door behind him. I didn't want you getting jealous and misunderstanding, he said smoothly. I immediately backed away, eyes narrowing. I'm not jealous. What do you want? He didn't hesitate. I suddenly feel like kissing you. This man. His completely shameless declaration made my cheeks burn for no damn reason. I let out a dry laugh. Careful, I might defend myself and knock you out. I believe you, he replied without missing a beat. But despite his playful tone, his long legs closed the distance in seconds. I felt the cold edge of the desk press into my back. No way out. I narrowed my eyes. Mr. Spencer, as the lead attorney, you should know that forcing a kiss on your secretary is illegal. How long do you think that sentence would be? He smirked. I'd be able to sue the other person instead. And before I could retort, his lips were already on mine. His low voice hummed against my lips. Sweetheart, I liked the last lip balm you used better, but this one's not bad either. This damn man. Now he was picking favorites? Get lost, I huffed, shoving him away. But instead of backing off, he stayed put, his gaze flickering with something uncertain, almost dazed. Baby. His voice dragged out, low and slightly wounded, making my spine tingle. Damn it. For a second, I almost gave in. But I quickly turned my head away. We're not that close. Keep your distance. What was he thinking? We weren't a couple, what was with all these kisses? He didn't move. Instead, he leaned in, his forehead touching mine, his nose barely brushing against mine. What would it take for you to let me get closer? His voice was soft, coaxing. Why don't we relive the good old days? He was getting bolder. Ever since I had slapped him that day, he had only doubled down, showering me with gift after gift. And that was weird as hell. Because years ago, he had literally told me, buying flowers is a waste. You'd be better off buying books. And now? Now, he was sending me gifts every day. Rebecca, your coffee's here. I took the custom-made coffee Mike had arranged for me, just as a colleague grinned at me. Rebecca, you should just marry a good man when you meet one, he teased. I snorted, throwing it right back at him. Oh? Are you a good man? God no. He backed away immediately, holding his hands up. Please, spare me. I don't want to get sued into oblivion by the boss. Oh. Right. I had forgotten, Mike was not just any lawyer. People who didn't know what they were doing would never dare mess with him. If they did, they'd probably end up in jail. Luckily, I didn't have to deal with him this afternoon. Mike had an important meeting with a high-profile client, which meant he'd be too busy to bother me. And that worked out perfectly, because my big boy, Nesson, had a parent-child event at his kindergarten today. I finally had the perfect excuse to spend some quality time with my little traitor. As soon as I arrived at the kindergarten, Mike was right behind me. His cold gaze landed on me, full of questioning. If it weren't for Nesson calling me, I wouldn't have known you were hiding such an important event from me. I quickly tried to deflect. It's nothing, you're so busy, we didn't want to trouble you with something so small. His skeptical expression said it all, though. The teacher in charge, still smiling, looked at me curiously. Mrs. Spencer, is this gentleman? I cut her off, speaking quickly. He's Nesson's uncle. I had no idea what possessed me, but I handed Mike a new identity right on the spot. The teacher smiled and left, but before I could bolt, Mike grabbed my sleeve, pulling me back. What do you think you're doing? Running away? How dare you say I'm Nesson's uncle, he demanded, his voice full of mock disbelief. Which uncle has the guts to come to my son's parent-child event? Come on, tell me, and I promise I'll make sure he's sitting down by the end of the year. He bombarded me with 3 quick questions, each one landing harder than the last. With his intense gaze on me, I laughed awkwardly. We're just colleagues, really. If I said anything more complicated, it might affect your chances of finding a girlfriend, right? Oh? Should I thank you for that? He asked, his tone dripping with sarcasm. No need for thanks, I mumbled, trying to wiggle my sleeve free. But instead of letting me go, he traced his hand down my sleeve, finally holding my hand. Let's go, let's watch our son. So everything I'd just said? Completely pointless. When Nesson saw us walking over hand in hand, he jumped up excitedly, shouting, Mom, Dad, let's do the activity together later. I couldn't bring myself to refuse such a pure, innocent smile. And I definitely didn't expect Mike, who had been an elite professional for years, to still be so good at the physical activities. He completely dominated all the other dads in the kindergarten. Nesson was so happy, he was practically jumping in circles. As for me, I was being watched by the other moms with a mix of curious and envious glances. All I could do was smile awkwardly. If they knew the history between Mike and me, I wondered if they'd still look at us the same way. We were the center of attention, and when we went up to receive the award with Nesson, the teacher even took a family photo. The photo was printed right there and then. Mike was holding Nesson, both of them with big, happy smiles on their faces, and I stood by Mike's side, smiling gently. Our little family looked so warm, so perfect. Nesson happily ran off to show off to the other kids, but I couldn't help but stare at the photo, feeling a sense of melancholy. Is this warmth and happiness what the reality of our lives looked like? Or was it just a snapshot, a fleeting illusion? Rebecca, let's get back together. Mike suddenly sat down next to me, his voice a little hoarse. When I looked up, I saw a silent sorrow in his cold eyes. He stared at me steadily, and then softly repeated, Let's get back together. Please, what do you say? I was a little stunned, not knowing how to respond. To outsiders, Mike seemed flawless, an ideal choice for a husband. But I was scared. Scared that the nightmares of the past would come rushing back. I was scared I wouldn't be able to control my emotions and might become a hysterical woman, dragging him into endless pain. It seemed easier to just stay like this, with a peaceful distance between us, than risk falling back into chaos. I'm sorry for what happened before. Mike, with his usual pride, lowered his gaze, looking deeply apologetic. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I thought I could just move past those love letters without caring, but I never imagined it would cause you so much pain. He paused, his voice growing more regretful. I often think about it. What if I had thrown those letters away sooner, or if, instead of mocking you when you were upset, I had just held you and comforted you? Would we still be together? His voice trembled slightly. Even though we're apart now, I still want what I once dreamed of. But I didn't have the courage to come back. I was afraid our emotions would still be the same as before, sharp enough to hurt us both. Only when Nesson reached out to me did I realize how terribly wrong I was. His voice broke, and I felt my eyes sting. If it weren't for love, who would choose to have a child, to commit like this? But we were both so young, not understanding how to love each other, and instead, we wounded each other until we were both broken. Don't cry, it's all my fault. I messed up. Mike pulled me close, his cold eyes carefully searching mine. Rebecca, can we start over? But you're a lawyer. I muttered, still reluctant, unable to accept that I might be walking straight into the fire again. His expression immediately shifted to concern. If you don't like the legal profession, I'll let them go today and switch to something else. I shook my head. No, don't do that. Then what's holding you back? Whatever I can change, I'll change. Now, Mike seemed so much more thoughtful than he was 5 years ago. I couldn't help but sigh. Before, we never really talked about our feelings. It was always you pushing me away. Then let's talk now. But dating a lawyer. I'm afraid that in the end, I'll be left with nothing but my underwear. Having witnessed Mike's skills in action over the past few days, I had every reason to be cautious. It was better to avoid stirring him up when it wasn't necessary. Ah, so this is what you're worried about? Simple. Mike immediately called for Nesson, and together we headed straight for the office. Nesson, curious, asked, Dad, what are we going to do? We're going to do something that will make your mom comfortable enough to marry me. He said it with such confidence. Now I was even more curious. How did he know of some quick way to make me agree to marry him? I was dying to find out what his plan was. Within an hour, organize all my asset reports. As soon as he arrived at the office, Mike immediately gave the instruction to the head secretary. I was a bit confused, but I vaguely sensed what was happening. The documents were quickly handed to Mike's desk. He swiftly changed them into a transfer contract, signed it with a flourish, and pushed the contract toward me. From now on, my people and my heart, including all my assets, belong to Miss Rebecca. Suddenly, Nesson asked, Dad, if Mom doesn't want you anymore, won't you become a poor man? That would be so sad. Mike nodded, and Nesson looked at him with a mix of sympathy. Then Nesson quickly patted my hand and said seriously, Rebecca, your son Nesson commands you to agree to marry my dad right now. I was about to pinch his fake serious little face when he suddenly leaned in and whispered, Mom, hurry and agree, or Dad's money will go to another woman, and we'll have to drink the northwest wind. Truly, my good son. At the crucial moment, he was still thinking about our bright future together. We exchanged a look and, in silent agreement, tucked the stack of contracts into our arms. Mike, welcome to our little family. Mike laughed helplessly. I wouldn't want you two to not live a good life. You weren't this generous back then. Mike's ears turned a bit red. He called the secretary and had Nesson taken to play, then pulled me into his arms, resting his chin gently on my neck. Baby, I've missed you so much these years. My heart skipped a beat. I liked you so much back then, but you never gave me a chance to explain. You just smiled and wished me happiness. Tell me, how cruel were you? You owe me compensation. He mumbled, lightly biting my neck. I shuddered, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. This man is definitely a wolf, he always bites me without warning. But wait, what did he just say? He liked me back then? I've always liked you. Maybe seeing my confusion, he gently laughed. Rebecca, you're my wish. I blushed, a sweet smile curving my lips. I thought, we'll definitely be very happy in the future.